In the shadowed corners of South Carolina's death row, a chilling chapter unfolded in 2025 as the state revived the firing squad, a method unseen in America for 15 years, claiming 3 lives in a brutal resurgence of capital punishment. Brad Keith Sigmon, a broken man haunted by addiction and rage, bludgeoned his ex-girlfriend's parents to death with a baseball bat in 2001, only to face his end on March 7, strapped to a chair with a target over his heart, bullets shattering the silence in a bloody spectacle. Weeks later, Mikal Deen Mahdi, a product of unimaginable childhood trauma and systemic neglect, who ambushed and burned an off-duty police captain during a multi-state spree, met the same fate on April 11, his execution later revealed as botched, prolonging agony in ways that horrified even seasoned observers. Then, in November, Stephen Corey Bryant, the taunting spree killer who scrawled, "Catch me if you can," in a victim's blood after a week of terror in 2004, became the third, his shallow breaths fading after the volley. These cases expose the raw underbelly of justice, fractured souls shaped by abuse, addiction, and failure, ended by state-sanctioned violence that mirrors the brutality it condemns. Dive into these harrowing stories of crime, remorse, and controversy, where redemption clashes with retribution. If this glimpse into the darkness grips you, like, share, comment your thoughts on the death penalty, and subscribe for more unflinching true crime tales that force us to confront the human cost. Brad Keith Sigmon, State, South Carolina, age 67, execution date March 7, 2025. In the quiet suburb of Greenville County, South Carolina, on a seemingly ordinary spring morning in April 2001, a nightmare unfolded that would shock the community and echo through the courts for decades. Brad Keith Sigmon, then 43 years old, armed with a baseball bat, broke into the home of his ex-girlfriend's parents, David Lark, 62, and Gladys Lark, 59. What followed was an act of unimaginable brutality. Sigmon bludgeoned the couple to death, striking each of them 9 times on the head, crushing their skulls in a frenzy that lasted mere minutes. The Larks, defenseless and in separate rooms, offered no resistance as Sigmon went back and forth, ensuring his deadly work was complete. He then lay in wait for Rebecca Barber, his former partner of several years, to return home. When she did, he forced her into his vehicle at gunpoint, kidnapping her in a desperate bid to reclaim what he had lost. As she bravely jumped from the speeding car to escape, Sigmon fired a shot that missed. She survived, forever scarred by the terror. Fast forward nearly 24 years to March 7, 2025, when Sigmon, now 67 and graying on death row, made history as the first person in the United States in 15 years to be executed by firing squad. The first ever in South Carolina's modern era. Strapped to a chair in the death chamber at Broad River Correctional Institution, a hood over his head and a target pinned to his heart, 3 volunteer prison employees fired simultaneously from behind a wall. Witnesses described the sudden volley of shots, the flexing of his body a brief heave, and then stillness. He was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m., blood caught in a basin below. It was a violent end to a violent life, one that reignited fierce debates about justice, redemption, and the very nature of state-sanctioned death. The roots of this tragedy traced back to a fractured relationship poisoned by addiction and rage. Sigmon and Rebecca Barber had lived together in a trailer near her parents' home for years, but by early 2001, the romance had soared. Barber ended things, citing Sigmon's escalating drug use, cocaine and alcohol, and his abusive behavior. Devastated and spiraling, Sigmon spent the night before the murders fueling his fury with crack cocaine and booze. In a haze, he confided to a friend his plan to get Becky for leaving him, tying up her parents if necessary to force her return. What began as a twisted scheme to kidnap and perhaps reconcile morphed into cold, blooded murder when he arrived at the Lark home armed and unhinged. The couple, described by family as the steadfast rock of their loved ones, kind, hard-working people who would do anything for their kin, never stood a chance. David and Gladys were beaten so savagely that David's skull was nearly split in two. Sigmon later admitted everything to police without hesitation, insisting he had no excuses. "I'm guilty." At trial in 2002, prosecutors painted a portrait of premeditated evil, while defense attorneys argued mitigating factors: Sigmon's undiagnosed mental illness, childhood trauma, brain damage, and substance abuse that pushed him into a psychotic break. The jury rejected those pleas, convicting him on 2 counts of murder and burglary, and sentencing him to death. Appeals dragged on for over 2 decades, touching on everything from his mental state to challenges against South Carolina's execution methods. Sigmon spent his years on death row in quiet repentance, becoming an informal chaplain to fellow inmates, praying daily and expressing profound remorse for the pain he inflicted. As his final day approached, Sigmon faced an agonizing choice among South Carolina's execution options, reshaped by drug shortages and legal battles that made lethal injection unreliable. The state's default was the electric chair, a relic that could cook him alive, a scene horror he dreaded, or lethal injection with pentobarbital, whose secrecy and past botched procedures terrified him with visions of prolonged drowning in his own fluids. He chose the firing squad, believing it the quickest and least torturous, despite knowing 3 bullets would shatter bones and destroy his heart. In the lead-up, his attorneys fought desperately for stays, arguing brain damage and mental illness should spare him, but courts and Governor Henry McMaster denied clemency. Sigmon's last meal reflected simple Southern comforts: fried chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits, cheesecake, and sweet tea. Though he had requested 3 buckets of KFC to share with his death row brothers, a generous act denied by prison rules. His final statement, read by his lawyer as he sat hooded and targeted, was a poignant plea rooted in faith, a call for love, urging fellow Christians to end the death penalty. Quoting the New Testament, he rejected an eye for an eye, vengeance, reminding listeners that humanity now lives under grace and mercy, not Old Testament law. "Nowhere does God give man the authority to kill another man," he declared. Witnesses, including family members of the Larks wearing boots gifted by the victims, watched in tense silence as the shots rang out without warning. One reporter described the chamber's stark contrast to the peaceful sunset outside: fluorescent lights, gray walls, and the sudden, visceral violence of bullets ending a life. This case stirs profound questions about justice and humanity. For the Lark family, Sigmon's death brought closure, a reckoning for the irreplaceable loss of parents and grandparents who deserved none of the brutality visited upon them. "He's going to pay for what he's done," said grandson Ricky Sims, attending the execution. Yet others, including Sigmon's spiritual advisor and anti-death penalty advocates protesting outside the prison, saw only barbarism, a bloody spectacle. In 2025, echoing ancient punishments in a modern world, critics called the firing squad archaic and cruel, renewing calls to abolish capital punishment altogether. Sigmon himself, in his repentance and final words, embodied the possibility of redemption, a man who admitted his monstrosity, devoted his remaining years to faith and service, and died opposing the system that claimed him. Was this true justice, delivering retribution for innocent lives taken in rage? Or does it perpetuate a cycle of violence, the state mirroring the killer's brutality under the guise of law? As executions resume across America amid shifting methods and debates, cases like Brad Keith Sigmon's force us to confront uncomfortable truths about punishment, forgiveness, and what society owes both victims and the condemned. In the end, His story is a stark reminder that behind every headline lies shattered families, broken souls, and enduring moral dilemmas that no method of death can fully resolve. Mikal, Deen, Mahdi Estate, South Carolina, age 42, execution date April 11, 2025. In the sweltering summer of 2004, a violent multi-state crime spree erupted across the eastern seaboard, culminating in one of the most chilling ambushes in South Carolina history. Mikal Deen Mahdi, a 21-year-old drifter from Virginia fresh out of prison, lay in wait on a rural Calhoun County farm, hidden in a shed on property owned by off-duty Orangeburg Public Safety Captain James Myers, a 56-year-old veteran officer and devoted family man. As Myers returned home from celebrating his daughter's birthday, Mahdi sprang from the shadows, unloading 9 bullets into the unsuspecting captain, striking him repeatedly even after he fell, before dousing his body with diesel fuel and setting it ablaze. The brutality didn't end there. This was the climax of a frantic 3-day rampage that included robbing and fatally shooting 29-year-old convenience store clerk Christopher Boggs in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, over a can of beer, carjackings, and other violent acts spanning Virginia to Florida. Fast forward to April 11, 2025, Mahdi, now 42 and hardened by 2 decades on death row, became only the 2nd person in South Carolina, and the 5th in the U.S. since 1976, to face a modern firing squad. Strapped to a metal chair in the stark death chamber at Broad River Correctional Institution, a hood pulled over his head and a target pinned to his chest, 3 volunteer marksmen fired simultaneously. Witnesses heard a guttural groan of pain as the shots rang out, followed by labored breathing and moans, lasting about 80 seconds before he was pronounced dead at 6:05 p.m. But months later, autopsy revelations painted a darker picture. The execution was botched, with bullets largely missing the heart, prolonging Mahdi's suffering in a way that reignited fierce debates over the humanity of capital punishment. Mikal Mahdi's path to infamy was paved with profound personal turmoil, a chaotic childhood that his defenders argued the justice system utterly failed to address. Born in 1983 in Lawrenceville, Virginia, Mahdi endured a home shattered by violence. His father, a convert to Islam who changed his name to Sharif, came from a dysfunctional family marred by alcoholism and inflicted severe physical and emotional abuse. One of Mahdi's earliest memories was his father slamming his mother through a glass table. She fled when he was just 4, and his father falsely told him she was dead. Neglected and paranoid under his father's erratic care, Mahdi was shuttled to relatives by age 8. Entering the juvenile system at 14 for theft, he spent much of his adolescence in custody, enduring over 75 days in solitary confinement as a teen and repeated suicide watches with little to no mental health intervention. Desperately needing treatment for trauma and depression, he instead cycled through isolation that experts now recognize as torturous for young minds. Released from a Virginia prison in May 2004 after serving time for assault, Mahdi, unmoored and untreated, spiraled within weeks. His spree began in mid-July, a suspected murder in Virginia over a drug deal, the fatal shooting of Boggs in North Carolina, a carjacking in Columbia, South Carolina, and finally the calculated ambush of Myers, whom he targeted knowing he was law enforcement, perhaps fueled by deep-seated rage. Arrested days later in Florida, Mahdi confessed readily. In 2006, he pleaded guilty in South Carolina, where prosecutors portrayed him as consumed by hate and malice. Defense attorneys highlighted his traumatic upbringing and mental health neglect, but the jury and judge rejected mitigation, sentencing him to death after hearing scant details of his background. Less than 30 minutes of testimony. A separate North Carolina trial added life without parole for Boggs' murder. As execution loomed amid South Carolina's resumed death penalty push, Mahdi faced the state's grim menu the electric chair, unreliable lethal injection plagued by botched cases, or the newly authorized firing squad. He chose the latter as the lesser of three evils, believing it the swiftest despite its barbaric optics. His last meal evoked upscale comfort: a medium ribeye steak, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea, eaten quietly the evening before. On the day, he offered no final statement, staring straight ahead as witnesses, including a Myers family member and the Calhoun County Sheriff, watched in silence. The volley came without warning. Mahdi cried out, his body flexing against restraints. What followed? Prolonged gasps, groans, and heaving breaths hinted at something amiss. Post-execution autopsies commissioned by both the state and Mahdi's lawyers diverged sharply. The state's report claimed all 3 bullets hit, with 2 possibly entering the same wound and perforating the heart's right ventricle. But an independent pathologist reviewing photos and fragments found only 2 distinct entry wounds low on the chest, near the abdomen, missing much of the heart and causing slower blood loss. Forensic experts estimated Mahdi remained conscious in excruciating pain for 30 to 60 seconds, double or quadruple the 10 to 15 seconds expected in a precise strike, instead of instantaneous cardiac arrest. His lawyers decried a massive botch, criticizing the autopsy's lack of X-rays, close-up photos, or clothing examination to verify target placement, which one witness recalled seeming low. The prison-maintained protocol was followed, with the target positioned via stethoscope and X-ray beforehand. Mahdi's case crystallizes the raw tensions in America's death penalty debate. For victims' families and many in law enforcement, his execution delivered long overdue justice for a heroic officer ambushed in his sanctuary, the very spot where he had recently married, and for Boggs, slain senselessly. Myers was remembered as a quiet leader, a nature lover who mentored his granddaughter in fishing, his dreams of retirement on that farm extinguished in flames. Yet the botched procedure amplified voices calling firing squads archaic and unreliable, questioning whether any method can be truly humane in a modern society. Mahdi's advocates pointed to his redemption on death row, an avid reader of history, intellectually curious, advocating for life even as he faced death, and seeking to donate organs in his final days, a request denied. His story underscores systemic failures, childhood trauma untreated, mental health crises ignored, transforming a damaged youth into a killer. Was this retribution for irredeemable evil, or a state's mirroring of violence, perpetuating suffering under the banner of law? As South Carolina and other states grapple with execution backlogs and method controversies, Mahdi's prolonged final moments force a reckonings. Does capital punishment heal wounds, or inflict new ones? And at what point does the pursuit of justice cross into cruelty? In an era of resumed executions, his fate compels deeper reflection on mercy, rehabilitation, and whether society can break cycles of pain without adding to them. Stephen Corey Bryant, State, South Carolina, age 44, execution date November 14, 2025. In the rural stretches of Sumter County, South Carolina, a wave of terror gripped the community over 8 harrowing days in October 2004. Stephen Corey Bryant, a 23-year-old on probation for burglary, unleashed a spree of violence that claimed 3 lives and left another man wounded. Posing as a stranded motorist or offering rides on lonely roads, Bryant preyed on unsuspecting victims, shooting them at close range in calculated ambushes. The most depraved act came at the secluded home of Willard T.J. Tyjan, a 62-year-old retiree. Bryant knocked, claiming car trouble, and when Tyjan let him in, he unleashed 9 bullets, then tortured the dying man by burning his eyes with a lit cigarette. Using Tyjan's blood, Bryant scrawled a mocking message on the wall: "Catch me if you can." He answered the victim's ringing phone, taunting Tayadjin's wife and daughter with the news of his death. The other victims, 36-year-old acquaintance Clifton Gainey and 35-year-old Christopher Burgess, were lured with rides, forced out to relieve themselves on rural roadsides, and shot in the back. A fourth man survived a similar attack. Arrested days later at his girlfriend's home, Bryant confessed fully. Fast forward to November 14, 2025. Bryant, now 44 and weathered by 2 decades on death row, became the 3rd person in South Carolina, and the 6th in modern U.S. history, to be executed by firing squad, part of the state's rapid resumption of capital punishment after a 13-year hiatus. Bryant's descent into monstrosity was rooted in profound childhood trauma that his defense argued the system ignored. Born in 1981, he endured repeated sexual and physical abuse by relatives and family friends, compounded by his mother's heavy alcohol and drug use during pregnancy, leading to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and permanent brain damage. Institutionalized in the juvenile system from age 11, he cycled through facilities with little mental health support. In the weeks before the spree, Bryant desperately sought counseling, haunted by flashbacks of abuse, but received inadequate help. Released from prison earlier that year after serving time for burglary, he relapsed into drug use and isolation. Armed with a stolen .40 caliber handgun, his killings appeared random yet methodical, robbery as motive, but laced with deeper rage. He targeted men in isolated areas, striking swiftly and fleeing. The taunting message and phone calls to Tayadjin's family revealed a chilling delight in chaos. Pleading guilty in 2008 to 3 murders and related charges, Bryant received death for Tayadjin's killing, the most aggravated due to its brutality, and life sentences for the others. Prosecutors portrayed him as cunning and pleasure-seeking in his cruelty, while defense experts highlighted impulsivity, poor decision-making, and antisocial traits stemming from untreated trauma and brain impairment. Appeals focused on whether the sentencing judge fully considered this mitigation, including claims of inadequate brain scans, but courts upheld the penalty, rejecting arguments of intellectual disability or incompetence. As his execution date approached, Bryant faced South Carolina's stark choices: lethal injection, powers plagued by secrecy and past concerns of suffering; the electric chairs, feared for its gruesome effects; or the newly authorized firing squad. He selected the latter, viewing it as the least painful despite its visceral nature. His last meal blended bold flavors: a spicy mixed seafood stir, fry over rice, fried fish over rice, egg rolls, 3 stuffed shrimp, 2 candy bars, German chocolate cake, and Pepsi, eaten in quiet reflection. On the evening of November 14, strapped to a chair in the Broad River Correctional Institution's death chamber, a hood over his head and a red bullseye target on his chest, Bryant offered no final words. He glanced briefly at the witnesses, 10 in total, including media and possibly victims' relatives holding hands, before the hood descended. At around 6:02 p.m., 3 volunteer prison employees fired simultaneously from 15 feet away, all with live rounds. The target flew forward from the impact. Bryant took shallow breaths for about a minute, followed by a final spasm. A doctor pronounced him dead at 6:05 p.m. Witnesses noted the process was swift and silent compared to prior executions, with no audible cries. Bryant's case embodies the raw fractures in America's death penalty discourse. For victims' families and many in law enforcement, his execution delivered deserved justice for innocent men slain in cold blood. Tayadjin, a kind retiree dreaming of quiet days; Gainey and Burgess, ordinary lives cut short in betrayal. The terror that paralyzed Sumter County for those 8 days demanded accountability, and Bryant's taunts only amplified the horror. Yet advocates and his legal team decried the firing squad as barbaric, a throwback to frontier vengeance in a modern era, especially amid claims that earlier 2025 executions by the method raised questions of precision and humanity. Bryant's profound brain damage, untreated trauma, and pleas for help painted him as a product of systemic failure, a child abused and neglected, transformed into a killer the state now mirrored in violence. On death row, he showed glimpses of remorse and stability, disciplined only twice in 17 years. Critics argued execution ignored redemption's possibility and perpetuated cycles of harm, particularly for the deeply damaged. Was this true retribution, closing a chapter of terror? Or does it underscore a flawed system that punishes the broken without addressing root causes like mental health neglect and childhood devastation? As South Carolina ties Utah's modern record for firing squad executions in a single year, and with dozens more on death row nationwide, Stephen Corey Bryant's story compels unflinching scrutiny. Capital punishment promises closure, but often leaves lingering wounds. Families forever grieving, societies debating mercy versus vengeance. In an age of resumed executions, it challenges us to question whether death truly heals or merely echoes the brutality it condemns. Reflect on the human cost for victims denied life, and for a man shaped by unimaginable pain, ended by bullets in the name of law. Follow these cases, engage in the ethical debates, and advocate for reforms that prioritize prevention, mental health support, and justice that breaks cycles rather than continuing them. Only through honest reckoning can society move toward a system that values all lives, even the most fractured. As the echoes of gunfire fade from South Carolina's death chamber, where Brad Sigmon's repentant faith, Mikal Mahdi's prolonged suffering, and Stephen Bryant's final silence marked a grim trifecta in 2025. These executions leave us grappling with profound unease. Were these men irredeemable monsters, deserving the ultimate penalty for their savage crimes, or products of shattered lives, trauma, scarred childhoods, untreated mental wounds, and addictions? That society failed long before they failed it. The firing squad, heralded as swift and sure, revealed cracks, one precise, another botched, the third eerily quiet, reigniting debates over cruelty in a modern world. Victims' families found closure in retribution, yet advocates see only perpetuated cycles of pain, the state echoing the killer's violence under law's cold veil. In an era resuming the machinery of death, these stories demand we question. Does capital punishment heal, or does it harden hearts further? True crime isn't just about the horrors committed. It's about the moral shadows they cast on us all. What do you think? Justice served, or barbarism reborn? Like if this moved you, share to spark conversation, comment your views on firing squads and the death penalty, and subscribe for deeper dives into the cases that haunt America's conscience. Together, let's uncover the truths hidden in the headlines.